My name is Sam. I had rented a place up in the Appalachian Mountains in North Georgia because I just needed to get away from my apartment for a week. I am a freelance graphic designer, 29, and I was up against a massive branding deadline for a corporate client that had been dragging on for 6 months. I figured 5 nights alone in the woods in mid January with nothing but my laptop and a French press would force me to finally finish the project without any distractions. It was 2025, right after the holidays, and a heavy snow had already blanketed the area. The cabin was isolated, a few miles down a winding gravel road off the main highway, and my nearest neighbor was at least 3 miles back the way I came. I drive a 2016 Subaru Forester, which handled the snow fine on the way up, but once I parked in the short gravel driveway, I didn't plan on moving it again until Friday. The cabin itself was standard rental stuff, lots of exposed pine, a small kitchen with dated white appliances, a chipped formica counter, and a cast iron wood burning stove in the center of the living room. Cell service was terrible. I had one bar, maybe two, if I left my phone balanced just right on the kitchen window still. The first day was totally normal. I unpacked my groceries, set up my external monitor on the small wooden dining table, and just grounded out work. I had some generic lo fi playlist on Spotify going, drank way too much coffee, and barely looked out the window. By the first night, I was dialed in. I tend to work late when I have a deadline because the emails stop coming in and I can actually focus. I was staring at Adobe Illustrator, tweaking vector paths when I heard it. I remember checking the time because my eyes naturally darted to the clock in the top right corner of my Mac screen right after the sound happened. It was exactly 3 a.m. It was three distinct knocks. Rap, rap, rap. They were evenly spaced, medium volume, coming from the front door. I froze for a second, my hand hovering over my wireless mouse. My immediate thought was that it was a neighbor, or maybe a delivery driver who got completely lost. But at 3 a.m., that made no sense. Then I thought maybe it was a property caretaker checking on the pipes because of the deep freeze, but surely he would have called or knocked louder to announce himself. I sat there in the quiet, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Nothing else happened. After about 10 minutes of just staring at the door from the kitchen table, I decided it had to be a heavy branch hitting the porch, or maybe a loose floorboard shifting as the temperature dropped outside. Old cabins make weird noises, and the wind was picking up. I saved my file to my hard drive, shut my laptop, and went to bed in the back room. I honestly didn't even check the logs. I just assumed everything was fine. The next morning I woke up around 9:30. The sun was glaring off the snow outside. I made breakfast, just eggs and toast, and briefly checked the front porch when I went out to grab an extra bundle of firewood from the stake. The wind was pretty strong, so my loose board theory felt perfectly reasonable. I spent the whole day working on brand guidelines. It was a completely mundane Tuesday. Around dinner time, it started snowing again. Heavy, wet flakes that coated the driveway and the wooden porch steps. I hit a wall with my work around 1 a.m., but I wanted to push through and finish the typography section. I made some peppermint tea to keep myself awake. By 2:30 a.m., I was just mindlessly scrolling through my phone on the sofa, putting off the actual work. The sofa was pushed against the side wall of the cabin, right next to a large window that looked out into the dense trees. At exactly 3 a.m., the knocking happened again. Rap, rap, rap. But it was not the front door this time, it was the side window, less than 2 feet from my head. I jumped so hard I spilled hot tea on my sweatpants. I don't look out the window immediately. The blinds were those cheap plastic ones that rattle if you barely touch them, drawn completely shut. but the sound was so close and so incredibly solid, it didn't sound like a branch scraping glass. It sounded like knuckles, just three deliberate taps. My heart was pounding in my throat. I muted the TV. I had a baking show playing in the background on low volume and just held my breath. Hello, I said. I felt stupid the second the word left my mouth. There was no answer, just the faint howling of the wind outside. I convinced myself it was ice falling from the roof and hitting the glass on the way down. What else could it logically be? Nobody was going to hike through fresh snow in freezing temperatures just to tap on a window in the middle of nowhere. I turned off the living room lamp, crept back to the bedroom in the dark, and locked the bedroom door this time. I had a lot of trouble falling asleep. Wednesday morning, the snow had stopped, leaving a smooth, untouched white layer over everything. I was officially spooked, but in the daylight, the whole thing felt ridiculous. I texted my mom, complaining about the terrible Wi Fi, and didn't even mention the knocking. It sounded crazy in my head, like I was making up scary stories because I was isolated and over caffeinated. I kept working. The deadline was Thursday evening, so I had to finish the presentation deck. By Wednesday night, I decided I was not going to get caught off guard again. I originally planned to go to sleep by midnight, but my brain was wired and my layout still needed adjustments. As it got closer to 3 a.m., I started feeling this heavy, uncomfortable anxiety. My shoulders were completely tense. I kept checking my phone battery. It was at 68% and making sure it was connected to the spotty Wi-Fi. At 2:55 a.m., I turned off the music I was listening to. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the front door, then glancing at the side window. The silence in the cabin was almost deafening. The only sound was the fridge kicking on and off. I watched the clock on my computer screen. 2:58, 2:59, 3. Rap, rap, rap. I physically flinched. The sound didn't come from the front door or the side window. It came from the back door, located just off the kitchen, leading out to a small wooden rear deck. Whatever it was testing the entrances front, side, back. Always three knocks, always at exactly 3 a.m. The logical part of my brain was screaming that it was a prank, that some local teenagers knew the cabin was rented by a woman alone and were trying to mess with me. I grabbed my phone and walked slowly toward the back door. It had a small square window at the top, but it was completely frosted over with condensation and ice from the inside. I stood a few feet away, holding my phone tight. "I'm calling the police," I said, trying to make my voice loud and firm. My voice shook a little. There was no sound from the other side. I stood there for 20 minutes, shivering in the kitchen, before I finally gave up and retreated to the bedroom. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just lay there looking at the ceiling. Thursday morning, as soon as it was light enough to clearly see outside, I unlocked the back door and pushed it open. The morning air was bitterly cold. I stepped out onto the small wooden deck and looked down. The snow from Tuesday night was completely undisturbed. It lay in a perfect smooth blanket across the deck boards, down the back steps, and out into the bare woods. There were absolutely no footprints anywhere near the door. None. I stared at the snow for a long time, trying to make the physics work in my head. Could someone have stood on the ceiling? Could they have reached the door with a long stick from the side of the house? None of it made any sense. The snow was pristine. I went back inside, locked the door, and called the property caretaker. The call dropped twice before I finally got through. I didn't mention the exact time or the strange pattern, just that I thought someone had been on the property knocking on my doors late at night. He drove up in an old Ford truck about an hour later. He was a nice guy, maybe in his 60s, wearing a faded heavy jacket. He walked the entire perimeter of the cabin with me. He pointed out some small deer tracks near the tree line, but confirmed there were no human footprints anywhere near the back door or the side window. Probably just kids from a neighboring property messing around, he suggested gently. Sound carries weird up here in the mountains, especially in the cold. A branch breaking 100 yards away can sound like it's right on your porch. I nodded. It was a comforting lie, and I think we both knew it, but it was easier to just agree. He offered to stay parked in his truck at the end of the driveway that night, just in case, but I told him no. I had already decided I was leaving. I managed to email my final project files to the client using my phone's hotspot, packed my bags, and started loading the Subaru. I was leaving a day early, completely eating the cost of the final night, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be back in my apartment, where there was traffic noise outside my window and neighbors I could actually see. I brought my last bag out to the car and walked back up to the porch to lock the front door and leave the key in the metal lockbox. As I reached for the handle, the afternoon sunlight caught the surface of the door at an angle. The door was painted a dark metal green. Near the top, on the right side, there was a faint, greasy smudge. It looked exactly like the side of a bare fist had rubbed against the cold wood. I am 5 foot 4, and as I stood there looking at the mark, I realized it was at least 2 feet above my head. Someone or something had stood on that porch, completely silent, and knocked on the wood. I locked the door, put the keys in the box, and got in my car. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I drove down the mountain. I still catch myself checking the time when I am awake late at night, especially when the clock rolls over to 3.